Well, welcome everyone to Personalized Learning Webinar Series, presented by Barbara Bray and Kathleen McClaskey, co-founders of Personalized Learning, and you can see our website there at the very bottom. We also want to thank Steve Hargadon and Peggy George for hosting our webinar series on Classroom 2.0. So let me just tell you, we are really thrilled to have Elliot Washor, who is really an expert on personalized learning. He has been doing this for decades. So let me just tell you a little bit about Elliot. Elliot is the co-founder and co-director of Big Picture Learning in Providence, Rhode Island, and also the co-founder of the Met Center in Providence, Rhode Island. He's been involved in school reform for more than 35 years as a teacher, principal, administrator, superintendent, video producer, writer, and speaker. And he has taught and is interested in all levels of school, from kindergarten through college, in both urban and rural settings across all disciplines. His work has spanned across school design, learning environments, practice, and authentic assessment. He is supporting others doing similar work throughout the world. But Ellie's interests lie in the field of how schools can connect with communities to understand tacit and disciplinary learning both in and out of school. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Elliot Washor, who's going to present on personalization and student engagement. I'm turning it over to you, Elliot.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Does that mean I can move these slides around now? Oh, there we go. Okay, everything moves, so that's good. So I'm going to talk about personalization, or really the person in personalization, which has kind of been left out when you talk to certain groups of educators about what personalized means, businesses, medicine, all of the words used all the time. And this first little slide I have up is recently taken from a Gallup poll of student engagement. And unfortunately, you could have had this slide up for the last 3 decades, and it looks the same. And, younger children are more engaged, and as they go through school, they get less and less engaged in school, and they get more and more bored. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about today, at least I hope to really hit on, is talking about prevention rather than treatment. What we do a lot of in education and medicine and business happens to be treatments. Treatments cost a lot more money than preventions. And I think this is and believe this is a big deal to hit on when we talk about personalized. Let me just kind of give you an example of, I fly all the time, unfortunately, and sometimes fortunately, because I like to go to the places where we work and engage people face to face. And I was getting on the airlines, and it was the Friendly Skies Airlines, or so they say, Friendly Skies, and we couldn't take off because I was on one of those little planes, and somebody comes on about 20 minutes later and says, well, you're all on the plane, but the plane's too heavy, and we can't take bags off because the rule of our airlines is bags go before people go. Well, it's the Friendly Skies, and I'm going, what do you mean bags go before people? I want to start a ruckus on the plane, but we sat there for about 90 minutes, had a little standoff until finally 2 people volunteered to get off the plane in the middle of the night so the rest of us could take off. And so here's a rule that people put out there, and instead of letting the people fly and taking the bags off, they had to let the bags fly, and the bags didn't go off with the people, and some people had to get off the plane. And yet they would call themselves the Friendly Skies, and of course everybody, the flight attendants, say, well, we apologize, but those are the rules. And so nobody really has authority, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. What that means in schools and in businesses, and how people use that word personalization in some very, very funny ways, and how things sometimes get connected to personalization in some funny ways. So here's a little slide from a new book, and it's about a woman, Amy Chua, and her husband, Jed, I believe, Rudenfeld, who wrote a book about how they think children can be successful. And this connects to academic rigor. And Amy Chua is the woman who is coined as the Tiger Mom. And this is her new book, what it says. 3 things. That my child is an honor student with a superiority complex, impulse control, and a deep sense of inferiority. And they say if you have those things, you're going to be successful in school, and that certain groups of people encourage those behaviors. First of all, there's a lot to talk about here. Second of all, it doesn't really talk or speak to engagement or what the child really wants, or is anybody asking him or her what they want. And just to break this stereotype a little bit, this is a young man who is now the youngest person to ever graduate medical school, who's Asian. And his mom homeschooled him. He was a classically trained pianist, and she did it because he was bored and disengaged in school. And here's a couple of quotes that are on the slide. Why would being allowed to challenge yourself be considered more damaging than being totally bored? And that's what the school system told this mom, that when she really wanted her child to be challenged around the things that he was interested in. She has a daughter as well. You see her in the background, who's also a college graduate now, I believe, or is going to college. She said, no, this isn't going to work. And on the bottom, she says, my priority was never my kids' academic success, but their well-being and happiness. So she was operating from a prevention mode, not a treatment mode. She wasn't going to allow a child to go into a system and have what I believe is pronounced as iatrogenesis. That is, when a patient in a hospital comes out sicker than when they went in, and that the cause of the illness is more around the nurse or the doctor or the facility itself causing the disease. I would argue that we have quite a bit of that going on in our education system as well. So here's a little pencil. It's the kind of pencils I use. They're pretty interesting pencils. They're called Palomino Blackling 602s. I would recommend them to you. And they really, when they have that little slogan there, there's really something to it. Half the pressure, twice the speed. From my understanding, Picasso and Hemingway used these pencils way back when. And I show that to you because I'm going to show you another slide now. These are goalies, a pair of goalies from Finland. And we all talked in education about how the Finns are producing such a great educational system. This is about goalies, though. Why would they produce great goalies? Well, it goes back to this half the pressure, twice the speed, and connections to the term personalized and personalization. So Finnish goalies are developed exactly the opposite of how they would be in America. They're not the biggest kids. They're not the strongest kids. They happen to be pretty fast. And they happen to have developed slowly. And a coach gets connected to them at a very early age and works with them and works with them and works with them on their speed, on their agility, and on their connections to the rest of the team. So psychologically and emotionally, they stay connected to the team and to the game and don't have all the pressure on them. I don't think that that's a metaphor looking for a reality. I really believe that there's something there for us to mine and to talk about when we talk about having strong connections to the things that you really want to do well, having adult supports around you, and being part of a community. And all those pieces working together, whereas in America, we do just the opposite in our school systems as well, and get very, very different results. So this next slide, and I'm just setting us up to have hopefully some real good questions and provocations around this, is a slide that I borrowed from a fellow named Roger Martin, who's the Dean of the School of Business, the Rotman School of Business, or was. He's still there. He's not the Dean right now. And when I looked at this, he said, well, this is a representation. It's not a reality, but a representation of how businesses develop. And when I look at this, I said, no, wait a second. That's a little bit more of a learning theory. If you make the arrows go back and forth and loop around a bit, than it is just a business theory. And so my bet is, if I asked you, where do schools live, we would all say in algorithm. That's what's really going on in schools. That teachers right now are not allowing students to ask a lot of questions. It's not highly personalized. It's just A to B to C to D. Connect the dots. Learn how to do that well, regardless of whether you have an understanding or a learning. Maybe sometimes you do, maybe sometimes you don't. But as a learning funnel, we all start in mystery, where all the dots are all over the place, and we figure out how to connect those dots. And then we move into a space where, as we figured that out, we've developed our own rules about how those dots and how those pieces of the world and our realities that are connected to community and people and connected to other objects that we want to get better at doing. We figure that out, and then we start playing with those rules of thumb and eventually sometimes even algorithms. If you start with the algorithms, though, students a lot of times, like myself included in this, say, wait a second, I'm lost. And they're really lost. They're really not engaged in their learning because they haven't started and looped back and forth through mystery and heuristics. They're just starting with the algorithm. That depersonalizes learning. So what we also have now is a term that's being used a lot called mindset, academic mindsets, and agency. My fear is what we're doing actually is we're developing a central intelligence agency, a way to depersonalize it, to take it away from people that students are connected to and communities, and we're asking them to operate alone, to have an academic mindset where they feel that they can do the work. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that, but I believe that you need to be connected to other people, that agency is connected to personalization, and that young people have trustees, fiduciaries, advisors that are part of the equation of agency to make you have actions that are productive and engaging. That seems to have been left out in the equation to develop student agency and to develop academic mindsets for the most part. So I can't show you this video, but this was a little excerpt from a Today show. And it was about a family of about 10 children, all of whom were being homeschooled, some of whom have already graduated college and medical school by age 21. From two parents who were just kind of regular people, got married young, didn't finish school till they were older, and their whole trick to all of this was allowing their children to follow their interests. Allowing their children to follow their interests, connecting them to those interests with adults in the community and at schools and colleges when they were young and at home, and allowing those pursuits around those people and the things that they love to do and get better at to thrive. Once again, prevention, not treatment, encouragement. And when the mom was asked, how do you know when your child is bored, she said, they'll tell me. They don't want to do this anymore. I mean, some of this is just so simple, and yet in schools, there's no time to even ask the questions, or as I go around to schools that are not mine or part of the ULIP community of practice schools, I can walk into schools, and I do, and I don't hear one student ask one question throughout the entire day. And I've observed and had that happen. I say, well, if you're not asking questions, isn't that an indicator that you might not be learning anything? Why is that happening? So in mine and Charlie's book, Charlie Majowski, that we just put out, Leading to Learn, we worked on student engagement. And we were asked by a group of the Governor's Council and the feds, why do students drop out of school? They did a whole bunch of studies, and they came up with life events, behavior, academic failure, and disinterest. That's why students drop out. And we said, well, those things happen in combinations. They don't happen all at once. You never know when. Just because you identify them doesn't mean that you know what to do. And what they had done was considered treatments, once again, not preventions. We said, we coined those the big four, but we also said that there's a deeper four about why students are not engaged in school. And they're on the bottom there, and that's that fissure that's cracking even further down and deeper. Is that what they do, what they like, doesn't matter to the school. And even when students choose and parents choose a school, the school also has to honor the other part of that compact, which is they have to fit the student, each and every student, and the student has to fit the school. And both have to be done. And then, as we just talked about earlier, a lot of things are restricted in school. There's more and more rules and regulations put on our young people to the point where they don't feel adult. They don't have their agency around all sorts of things. Where they do outside of school, they may be taking care of their mom or grandmother. The school doesn't even know that. Because the school's only concern with their social emotional learning seems to be only academic growth, not their whole well-being. And then students are not asked what their interests and talents are. One of our people, Andrew Frischman, was just at a South by Southwest conference on a panel. And on the side, there were a whole group of students presenting, all in high school. Andrew went over to all those students and said, these are incredible projects that came out of your interests. Does your school know anything about this? The answer was 100% no. Next question, obviously, since the first question was answered that way, does the school give you any credit for any of this? And the answer was no, too. So there's something off in these deeper four, where schools are not recognizing students' talents and interests. There's so much restriction put on their movement, on what they can do with their time, that what that matters to them may not matter to the school, or the school's not paying attention, and that the fit is off. And so our book was about how to prevent students from being disengaged, and that we put out a list of expectations that students have of us, and that I'd like to just present those to you right now so you see them. So the first one is relationships, and these are juxtapositions. At a regular school, there you are as a me, because the lowest common denominator is not the student but the class. And in our schools and schools similar, students are surrounded by adults, their teachers, their mentors, their parents. and community leaders. These are real big differences. Those are real healthy relationships. Next thing is relevance. Well, here you are going from A to B to C to D, kind of like what the Tiger Mom is saying. Just jump through the hoops. Just have an academic mindset. But the work also has to be relevant. What are you interested in? You have to ask those questions inside of a school. And you find that schools have real blind spots to this. They think that everything starts at the front of the door of a school and ends as students are leaving, and that learning isn't occurring 24 hours a day, 7 days a week outside of school. And students bring those interests, whether they're academic, disciplinary, career and technical, they bring those interests to the door with them already, and they're looking for those matches. And so if you ask, they'll tell you if it's an environment that they're trusted in and that they feel trusted. This is another one of these pieces. Relevance. Time. All right. Well, here's a girl. She's taking her own time, writing her own novel. These are all examples of young people at our schools. I could talk about one after another about what they're doing. But what happens in regular school? You're timed on everything. There's some, I go into some schools, the teacher says you have 50 seconds to talk to your neighbor. You have 10 seconds to think about that question. That's not how we learn. It's not how we operate. It's just wild to even think that way. And timing. Well, you're told what to do when. But in the real world, timing is really important, and you're in charge of it. That's agency. You can go to somebody to ask for help. You can put B before C and A. These are things that can happen and do happen all the time. Learning is not in a straight line. Learning is in spirals and in loops. There are no straight lines in nature. And so these are really, really big deals. Play. All right, there's one child on one side. Grades, no time to play. Make mistakes, and it becomes permanent impact. Other side of the equation is you make mistakes and you learn from them. Practice. Information goes in, but then we forget. If you use your hands, if you use your whole being, if you talk to people, if you take your time, if you're interested in what you're doing, all of a sudden, practice keeps going. I was with a guy who was an actor yesterday. I said, how do you learn how to read your lines? He said, well, first I memorize them. I got to get them inside so I know what the words are. He says, but then something happens. I have to become that person whose lines I'm reading. And I can't tell you how it happens, but it does. It's not just I'm memorizing them. That's the acting part. That's the real experiential part. That's the part where you move towards mastery. Choice. Well, if you go to American high school now, choices are pretty much laid out for you. Don't have much time to vary. But once again, in other schools, like ours and others, like I mentioned in the Deeper Learning Community of Practice, and others out there as well, and teachers doing great work, paying attention to real choices students are making. And if you don't ask, they don't tell a lot of times, but they'll come up with some really incredible stuff. Authenticity. Well, I can walk into any classroom, and I've done this for years, and I go over to any student and I say, is this work real or fake? That's one of the questions. Immediately they'll be able to tell me. Is it real? Is it really mine? Do I own it? Or am I just doing it because this is how we do school? So these things are real important. Is the work authentic to the student? And does the school accept and credit authentic work? Once again, challenge. Well, how are you challenged on a ditto? How do you develop an academic growth mindset from that? How do you not talk to other people? Rather than working with mentors, being in your community, working with your teacher, working with other students, where you're challenging yourself around something that's authentic and that you're interested in. Application. Well, you have to take what you're doing and apply it somewhere out in the world. Or is it something that's all living in your head? And nothing, as Yogi Berra said one time, in theory and practice are the same, but in practice they're different. And that's a big deal, because even with theories, things break down. There's uncertainties. When the real world starts coming into play, things change. And those are the challenges. That's why mathematicians and scientists are trying to figure out new theories all the time. That's all right. It's in your head. But it's real because it's real to the rest of the world as well. So those are the 10 expectations. And Charlie and I sometimes think of them as imperatives, or like to think of them as imperatives, that we need to do these things to prevent disengagement, so we don't have to have treatments at the other side. So we frame these as the underlayment, as the foundation. On the bottom, relevance, relationships, choice, challenge, application, authenticity, practice, play, time, timing. And what we've done with our schools is we've developed programs around those expectations. Authentic assessment, personalized learning plans, where every student has a learning plan, where people who know you well are part of that plan and are questioning you on what you understand in your projects, in your tinkering, in your coursework, that you're learning through your interests in the outside world, that there's an advisory system where somebody knows you well from the school side of things, that the learning is real, that there's connections to colleges, technical schools, work, and post-secondary transitions, and that your parents know what you're doing. So along with that, we work and have worked with a man named William Sedlacek, and he studied college, people who graduate college in 4 years across race, class, and gender. And what he found were these 8 pieces that those people had. And we've managed to start putting these on learning plans to get students to pay attention to them, about how they're open, resourceful, and persistent, as people from the Muse schools say, around these concepts. Do they have a positive self-concept? Do they really have a realistic self-appraisal? Do they have long-term goals, short-term goals? How do they handle the isms in their life? Do they know when to walk away? Do they know how to stand up for themselves? Do they display quiet leadership or leadership in the front of the pack? As long as it's leadership, as long as they learn how to lead, it's a big deal, and practice it. Do they have a strong go-to person in their life, outside of school as well as inside? Do they belong to community organizations that the school all is knowing about? And how do they learn in ways that are not just the academic, disciplinary ways, but in non-traditional ways, through making things, or through dance and the arts and the performing arts and the fine arts? So this is one of our students, Hannah. She's at college now. She was interested in technologies. This is her at her internship. Did great. Didn't do great before she came to the Met in San Diego. This is another student, Noah. He's graduating this year. He's working at the water treatment plant on the San Diego River. He made a pump that cost $10,000 for $700. Helped his community, learned a lot around the biology, the environment, how to work collaboratively with people, all those things from that internship that he's had for quite a number of years. And now he's getting accepted to college as a senior. And so there you have it. There's our 10 expectations shown as preventions, not just as treatments. And right now, I'll start taking some questions on what I just put out there. Thank you.
So, Elliot, some of that went by kind of fast for some people. So I was wondering if you could put that slide back, and then we can come back to this one, the last slide. And
yeah.
For me, it was really clear how you put these 10 expectations together, and they all made so much sense to me. So I wasn't sure, there weren't any questions, but I'm wondering if anyone has any questions about any of these while they're up here.
Sure.
And how they see they could be working in the schools they're working with. So I don't know, Kathleen, if we want people to just write. So she just wrote, what is the difference between time and timing?
So time is having enough time to do something. And timing is that it occurs in the right sequence. Does that make it clear? So in school, for the most part, it's A to B to C to D, turn the page. That's how you spend your time, and there's no choice around the timing when you do something. It's done right at that moment. When you're outside of school or when you're in other schools, and you have the choice around how much time you really have to spend on something, and when you're going to do it, that creates a big difference. Some of us, very few of us, I think, are awake at 6:30, 7:30 in the morning, especially as young people. And yet for the first 2 periods of a day in high school, a high percentage of our students, and I couldn't tell you exact percentage, are really asleep. And things are just keeping on going. Well, if the timing was different, which people talk about in a competency-based system, where it's anywhere, anytime, and we would also say anyway, and you got credit for as long as you know it, any way you learned it, that's a real different system. And I would argue, just like I'm arguing about how personalization is used, that you look good to an algorithm, a competency-based system has to be around real choices around when you learn something.
I love that. That makes so much sense. And I liked one thing you just said was anywhere, anytime, anyway. That's new.
That's the challenge. That's the real challenge. Anywhere, anytime keeps you doing the same things you always did. Anyway is a difference in authenticity and performance. Where'd you learn it? Inside of school, outside of school? Who taught you? Can you do it? That's the question.
Betty just wrote a question. I don't know if you can see it in the chat, but she said, have schools used these 10 in conversing with kids?
Yes. Yeah, I've been watching this happen all over the world. I've been fortunate enough in the last month to get to Australia and New Zealand, where we have quite a large number of schools. And I was shocked and pleasantly surprised to see students using these expectations in those countries as well as in the United States and in Canada. They've gravitated towards them. They make a lot of sense.
She also mentioned a Kaplan article from May where it says, I like the I statements. I'm not sure if you read that, but I'm not sure what she's referring to. But
the I'm not sure either. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, okay, Kelly asks, have schools used these 10 in conversing with kids' parents?
Well, that's an excellent question. It's an excellent lead question. So if you go to 10 Expectations on YouTube, you'll see that we have animations around those graphics that I put up there. They got about 50,000 hits, and we just finished a new animation for how parents can use these 10 expectations in talking to schools about their children? So we hope the answer is yes, they will, and we're trying to push that out there. That's a good question. And very,
so Betty just, oh, sorry.
No, that's all right, and very timely.
That's great, because it's a lot of times parents are concerned when you are moving to a whole new structure of school because they only know what they know and what they were taught. So parents need these to be part of the conversations.
Oh yeah, we see these expectations, these student expectations that they have of us as a way to have this conversation where, once again, it's not as a treatment, but it's at a prevention. It's a healthy thing to do, to ask these and frame these up front and design programming around them. And every one of them has a research base to them.
Yes. So Betty said she found your article on bigpicture.org, and it was she said it was statements like, "Do I find what the school is teaching relevant to my interests, etc." She said she likes how these are worded.
Yeah,
that's what she was doing. Yeah.
Gotcha. Now I got the I part. So, right, Charlie and I put those together as a set of questions around the expectations after talking with lots and lots of students and staff at our schools. So I'm glad you like them. Thank you. Thanks for the feedback.
Melissa asks, how do these ideas mesh with students competing with each other to get limited spaces in specific colleges?
Yeah. So I don't know limited spaces in specific colleges. That's an interesting question I go off in a different direction on that. So colleges have changed and in some ways are going in two different directions. There's a bunch of colleges, hundreds of them, that are not looking at the SAT, ACT scores first, and are looking at who students are in front of them through interviews and what they've done in their communities and recommendations. Other colleges are, getting 20,000, 50,000 applications, and the first thing that they're doing is looking at a SAT score and a grade. So, the opinion is which one is the one you think is better and good for you, and how are they doing what they're doing, to select students, and even more importantly, or not sometimes, why they are selecting who they are selecting. So there's a broad array out there of colleges, some really, really highly personalized, and quite frankly, some very depersonalized. And so when you're talking about how these would get used in that context, I would say that the ones that are more personalized are using them. And I know that quite a few colleges, as well as a few foundations, are using William Sedlacek's work to award scholarship by reading essays and using that as a rubric. So
it seems like
that's kind of interesting, really.
Yeah, because we've been working with high schools, and the first thing out of the kids is, what about my grades? What about my, I need to get a 4.0 plus all AP classes, and they're still in that system.
Right, they are. And that's a conversation that's a highly personal conversation between parents and students and teachers in the schools that they want to go to. And I forgot the person's name who said this, and it's kind of like the crime isn't that people got an F in something and didn't know it, it's that they got an A in something and didn't know it. We have a lot of that going on in our schools. So passing the test Doesn't mean you know it. Doesn't mean you understand it. Doesn't mean you're going to remember it. And getting into a school that looks at those kinds of assessments or solely looks at them are decisions you're making about your future. I would suggest that people really know the people and the places that they're going off to, and not just the name of a place or the ranking of a college. These are big deals, and need serious consideration if the people are going to get away from a grade having some kind of meaning or a test score having some kind of meaning around what your understanding is of how you do what you do, the content and the process.
There's been a lot of questions. But Kelly just brought one up, and someone else brought something up about elementary school. But I'll just take Kelly's first. And she wrote, if we are talking about personalization learning for each student, should one of our goals is that all students go to college?
Well, this is personal. I'll give you a personal answer. Students don't necessarily have to go to college in the order and sequence that we want them to. And in many other countries, they do not. And they produce pretty happy people. Now, you have to follow your own personal choices around this and do what you feel is right at that right time. When you look at the data, you see a lot of people leave school after the first year. A lot of people leave school after the second year. We still don't have a high college graduation rate. Look at the numbers of students entering, look at the numbers of students leaving. So if you go to Canada, their numbers of students going to college is much lower percentage-wise than ours. That doesn't mean that they don't go back, though. After getting skilled in trades and other careers or doing work, they go back to post-secondary, to both 4- and 2-year schools. Just because we do it the way we do it doesn't mean it's the right way. And we've created these expectations that are going to change in the next bunch of years. College is very expensive. People are accruing a tremendous amount of debt, starting to think about that, sometimes with getting a certification, many times without. So these are much more serious financial decisions and life decisions. And so do I think everybody has to go to college? No, I don't. Not to be happy or successful. Everybody's a funny word here. And that includes people who have left. Many, we don't have to mention names, of people who left Ivy League schools who turned out okay, at least financially and successfully, how the society deems them to be. And yet school couldn't hold them there because school was paying attention to the accrediting system, and they were paying attention to the interests and the things that they had to pursue at the time. So they left to learn. Some of them came back, some of them got honorary degrees, some of them never came back. And schools, if they pay more and more attention to the interests of students, more attention, and start with the interests, and don't leave them there, but start there, we'll get a whole lot more mileage out of working with our young people and making them happier.
You know, Elliot, you brought that up, and several people said, well, then how early do we start? Do we start in elementary school?
Start what?
Start working on these 10 expectations.
Oh, well, I think look, we can start very, very young. The point is that young people and parents start without us. Everybody's paying attention to this. We just haven't formalized it in the structure of school. So by the time a child is 3 years old, they're already identifying things that they're interested in getting better at. And they're already asking or telling you who they want to learn from to get better at. This is just normal behavior. And parents pay attention to this. And Benjamin Bloom wrote an excellent book, or research, did some excellent research, wrote a book on it called Developing Talent in Young People. I'd encourage everybody to read that. Basically, he studied people who were eminent in their fields, and he found out that they really weren't prodigies, that they had an interest in something, that they had strong parental support or adult support, and that those adults gave them the kind of technique, coaching, and tutoring that they needed to get really good at, and a child going into their older childhood years and become a teenager and then becoming adult, pursued those interests and got really good at them. What was the correlation between that and what schools were doing? Very little. And all we're saying is really pay more attention to the child in front of you, to the young person in front of you. What do they want to get better at? What are their interests with an S? How do we organize this on a learning plan that's a personal, with a person personal, not with an algorithm personal, not the business kind of personal that when, I think it's Jeff Bezos, goes to the store, and he says, well, what do you consider highly personalized? He says, when I go and I go into a bar and the bartender already knows the drink I want. Well, what if I change my mind about that drink that day? So, you know, that was said in some New Yorker magazine. And I'm sure there's more to it from Jeff Bezos than that, but it was a good example of there really has to be a person there. We do change our minds. We do live in degrees of uncertainty. And the person in personalization, especially in schools, has to be there. So students as agents act around the things that they're interested in, the things they want to get better at, the things they have to get better at, with adults in a role that guides them, facilitates them, and acts as their trustees and knows them well.
You know, Elliot, everything you're saying, actually, Elliot just wrote a guest post for us. It's on our website, all about this also, and it links back to, it's a cross post from his site. And we probably need to find that book on Benjamin Bloom that you mentioned.
You can get it. And there was subsequent studies done by a woman named Sosniak around that correlation of what role does the school actually play in developing the interests and talents of young people.
Mm-hmm. So U.S. Meister is asking, because he looks at, you know, Benjamin Bloom is mostly theoretical, and he's wondering how does it also offer the application for how it could look at the elementary level.
Right. Well, take a look at this.
There's a concern there about that.
Well, take a look at this book. He didn't just do Bloom's taxonomy. There were other parts of his work. And so I'd really recommend you take a look at it and draw your own conclusions from it. There's some very, very interesting, thoughtful work that was done there.
Okay. So I'll have to look it up, and we'll put it up for people so they can link to it.
Right.
Okay. You also mentioned your book, and we have a little bit of time left. I think maybe have you kind of share a little bit about what else is in the book, because I think people would probably want to get this book, especially when you mentioned they had to leave to learn.
Right. Well, there's really some strong examples of students from our schools and other schools and adults around why it's important to leave, to learn, and come back. That's what those footprints kind of show you. This is cyclical, and that we create a case around the deeper four, the 10 expectations, and a lot of examples and ways that anybody in any school and parents can develop their children's interests and engagement in school if they pay more attention to who the child is in front of them. One of our lines from Death of a Salesman is attention must be paid. It's a big deal in the book, to really pay attention to who the child is in front of you, to what their interests are, to what they want to get better at. One of our mentors, Dennis is mine, Charlie Seymour Saracen, always talked to us about that his notion and ideas and practices of productive learning and deep productive learning was that the student has to want to be engaged. And that comes through in the things that are being taught, the objects that you're learning to get better at, and the people who are showing you how to do that. Those are big deals that schools barely pay attention to.
You mentioned the book from Benjamin Bloom. Is it called All Our Children Learning?
It's
Is that the one you mean?
Developing Talent in Young People, I believe.
Okay. I just want to find it for people so they can...
I'll send you the link.
Okay.
It's definitely on Amazon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Old book.
I'll find it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of other books that are written on this topic, and it's not just about practicing something for 10,000 hours. And I spend a lot of time talking to people who are approaching mastery around all different kinds of things that they do. They're constantly getting better at it. And the one thing they won't do, as Mike Rose says, he has a nice quote about this, as mastery is foregrounded, the clock recedes. People lose track of time. They spend their time, no matter how long it takes, trying to get better at things. Another fellow who's a really good chef in Chicago also has a master's degree in philosophy and mathematics, and one of the top 5 chefs there says, if I read 5 books on a subject, I know what 95% of the world knows about it. To understand what that other 5% knows is going to take me the rest of my life. So when you really want to get good at things, you got to put in the time. You got to read, and as I think it was Van Gogh said, as you go deep, you go broad. You learn many things, is what he said. There's a different approach that also can be part of school. That it's not just a mile wide and an inch deep.
I do want to say we're at the end, but I think there was one question that Melissa brought up. She's concerned about how teachers are accountable for the learners to learn, and how it's been, that the accountability versus responsibility issue. And I just want to let everyone know, if you're willing to stay for a few more minutes, maybe Elliot can answer that.
Well, I can. I'm not so sure I understand. There's 2 ways I understand that question. One is the system that we have now, where teachers are their performance is based on student test scores. I don't know if that's what you meant, and of course, that to me that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the other way to think about this is that you have to look at how students are progressing over longer periods of time, not only around their academic performances, but around the things that they're interested in, how those are connected. So this is a longitudinal look at a student. And when we start, and we are, to develop personalized learning plans, my hope is that the data that's collected is qualitative as well as quantitative. And when you go to a doctor, going back to a medical metaphor or medical reality. You ask doctors what's the most important part of the examination. Many will tell you it's the history. They look at the patient, they write about them, they ask you certain questions, and they're collecting that data over time, your history. That's important. And a personalized learning plan is a big deal here to manage growth over time. And how you're accountable, well, there's some things you can be accountable for, and let's face it, there's some things that parents are accountable for, students are accountable for, teachers are accountable for, the community is accountable for, and sometimes they're all mixed up together and hard to pull out. That doesn't mean that they can't get some kind of qualitative thinking around it to make and have next steps for the life of a young person. That's how I would answer that.
Well, thank you, Elliot. I think that we've gone over time, but it was very, very informative, and everyone was really participating. The chat was flying by, so we're going to save the chat.
Yeah, I apologize for my dogs, but they started barking.
Yeah, thank you, Elliot. We really enjoyed this a lot. I mean, you have a wealth of knowledge about this topic, and anyone that wants to follow Elliot, he writes a weekly blog at leavingtolearn.org.
Yeah, and also a big picture. So thanks a lot, Barbara and Kathleen. It was a pleasure to work with both of you. And
thank you.
Everybody in the audience, and one of these days, I hope it gets more personal. We get to see each other.
Oh, yes. Thank you. We'll get everyone. Yeah, this is wonderful.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you everyone, for joining us. We will be archiving everything. It'll be on our site, and we'll give a link for Elliot to put it on his also.
Okay. I'm going to stop the recording.